Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications. What if you could shorten your sales cycle, build trust faster, and turn your marketing into a true competitive advantage, even in complex engineering-driven industries? Today, we're breaking down how empathy-led marketing powered by customer journey mapping helps you meet buyers mid-funnel, influence decisions across dozens of touchpoints, and create content that actually resonates in a crowded market. I'm joined by Beth Wilkerson, a marketing leader who has spent decades helping technical organizations translate customer understanding into real business growth. She brings a unique perspective on how empathy can drive measurable results where it is often overlooked.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to StrategyCast, Beth.
Hi, thank you, Lori. I appreciate you having me.
I tell you, this is such a meaty topic, isn't it?
Yes,
Beth and I,
absolutely.
actually, our pre-show discussions usually last about 30 minutes. Beth and I talk a lot longer than that. So we really had a great time. Tell us a little bit about your background and
Sure.
the organizations that you've worked with.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I've had an interesting background over the last 20 years. I've worked in highly technical fields that include engineering and engineering-led organizations, and that's led to rebranding and branding and starting up functions that have led to a $3.6 billion acquisition. I've also built functions during PE transitions, which is, as you know, a very uncertain time for organizations. And I've turned what one leader has called the squishy stuff into a competitive advantage, for the companies I work for.
That is amazing. I tell you, there's so much value in what you've just defined as transition, right? And I think it's one of the hardest spaces for marketers to really grasp their hands around, because you're getting either ready for acquisition, getting ready for investment, getting ready for IPO, getting ready to sell. And there's a lot of different people at the table and a lot of different people that we need to please. What drew you to that space? Like, what is it that excites you so much about that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a complex question. My background is not accounting, my background is not marketing per se. My undergrad is what I would call an oxymoron degree. It was in accounting and communications. And I think what was interesting about that is taking technical and complex data and making it easily understood and consumable by the recipient, and putting myself in their shoes to make things as simple as possible, as Einstein said, but not simpler, is really what my favorite thing about marketing. It's communicating with others, putting myself in their shoes, and ultimately ensuring alignment between the two parties, if you will.
I think that's great. And one of the real advantages of that oxymoron with comms and accounting today is that you're able to have a seat at the boardroom table and understand what the CFO and those investors are so interested in, and then create the dialogue and the reporting that really shows them not only what kind of an investment you need in marketing, but the impact that it ultimately can make. I think there's so much value in more marketers really understanding accounting. So I know that you would agree with that. Let's dive into the empathy advantage here. You talk about the empathy advantage. What does that mean in today's marketing context?
Yeah, as marketers, we must put ourselves in the shoes of the people we're trying to help, right? And I think that's something that in the day-to-day campaign-driven, speed-driven environment we see ourselves in, we can get caught up. I have too. You fill out the brief, You go to execute, come on, speed, speed, speed. But taking a step back and looking at through their lens, what's in it for me? That's a common WIFM acronym that all of us marketers refer to from time to time. But also taking the painstakingly purposeful process of going through the customer journey mapping, I think pays dividends because it's something that we can all anchor ourselves in. What questions are people asking? Where are they going for information? It puts a different lens on it instead of just talking about features and benefits.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you and I would agree on this, that empathy is more important than it ever has been today. Why do you think it's such a big issue?
Well, let's look at our environment, right? We've got a fractional, disparate environment where things are moving so fast. Communication is in different chunks, it's in different functions. And so then I'm starting to think about how people are consuming. It's now snackable size content. No one's sitting and watching something for hours on end per se. They're looking for the sound bites so they can, once again, speed, speed, speed. And I think as marketers, then we have to meet people where they are and create that demand-driven approach, understanding where people are and what kind of information they're seeking and what needs assessment, we can do to meet them where they are. Yeah.
And I'm absolutely amazed. It seems very basic and very simplistic, but I'm absolutely amazed at the brands that are not approaching things the right way. Let's just say it. It's the right way to market. Why is that? Why is it so prevalent that marketing today really does not lead with a lot of empathy? I would imagine, this is a guess on my part. There's no science behind this, but I would guess that 6 out of 10 campaigns, programs that are in market right now are not empathy led.
I would affirm that estimate.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in the competitiveness, where I'm in an aerospace field where competition, the growth is happening fast, and it's important for us to keep up with our competitors, understand maybe their weaknesses, where our strengths play into the market. But that can lead people astray to focus on those instead of really ultimately what's most important, and that's the customer. So to be hyper-focused on that customer, what needs they have, and address them with the messaging that we have in our marketing is so important. It's paramount.
Yeah, it really is. And you established that customer journey mapping is the foundation of empathy. For someone who has not done this before, what does a strong journey map actually include?
I think the first step is always identifying your segments. And you can start very high level. So as an organization and as an industry, I just gave a talk about this the other day, that it's important for us as marketers to assess our situation, or as Michael Watkins said in his book, The First 90 Days, diagnose your situation. If you're on the early adopter or growth end of the spectrum versus a mature market, and understanding where your customers and competitors are also within that space, I think that will lead you to decide how deep to take that segmentation. From the segmentation piece, then, prioritizing who's most important and getting cross-functional input on who those customers are is ultimately also of paramount importance. Once you have that alignment with leadership, then I think you can go to the next step and do the deeper dive into the personas.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's important here is that we're really establishing and connecting with the real experience of the customer, that it's not just information that we believe to be true. How are you working on absolutely affirming that customer experience is what in fact is happening?
I'm glad you brought that up, because typically in my line of work, we start with the anecdotal data. So we talk about the sales team and their experience with customers, where they are. You've mentioned mid-funnel. Typically, people are doing their own research before they even land on our website or even speak with one of our direct salespeople. So that context is also important, because we can use that to further qualify the customers and understand what kind of research and where they are in their journey. But to put it another way, your question was, how are we affirming or disproving some of that anecdotal feedback that we're getting? And that's, I think, where the direct feedback comes from, direct surveys. I was in market research for 5 years, and I can't advocate enough for direct surveys and confirming with customers. You see it all the time on e-commerce or traditional websites where, a bot will pop up. I think there's also something to be said about blind surveys, those that intend to keep the companies private and truly get their perspective without bias introducing,
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I see a lot of brands skip this step.
Yeah.
And back to what we were talking about previously, that's where they miss the boat on empathy.
Yeah.
You're not truly understanding the voice of the customer, and that's what all that leads to, then you're not going to be able to provide the empathy in your messaging and in your marketing and in your conversations, so on and so forth. That is absolutely crucial to the success of the growth of to the success of what marketing should be doing, which is the growth lever it provides.
Yeah, I agree completely. As I look at the engineering focused field that I'm in, this also introduces an interesting idea as a marketer to suggest these things and to champion them and not be deterred if there's not immediate buy-in. I remember one specific example. Now, this was in a time that I worked in agriculture. We did this meaty project, to use your words, perhaps against you, this meaty project where we looked at this wonderful mix of data, not only our internal data, but what survey data said. That voice of the customer told us that we had 5 main personas. And we looked at the multivariable regression analysis and the outputs of that and took the sales team through this playbook that they could use to assess their own book of clients and help drive their own prospecting process. After this lovely talk, we had a lot of good energy in the room. The next person speaking was about sales excellence from the personality perspective. And he asked me, he says, "How many sales have you made this year?" And I said, 0. I'm in marketing. I haven't made sales this year. He goes, "Great. I want you to sit down and I'm going to tell the rest of the organization how they can actually sell."
Wow.
Pretty wild to hear that. And what that taught me was that buy-in, the data's great, but what an organization is thirsting for is buy-in on the process. So finding the key influencers in an organization, and this person was one of them, that taught me a huge amount, because all the data and all the validation is not worth much if there's not that change management piece that we started to talk about at the top of the hour.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I love how he handled that, by the way. I think it's very, very interesting. And I want to bring this up because I think it's important as well as kind of even a precursor to getting into the journey mapping. And that is really diagnosing the business. And that's kind of what he was talking about as well. What does that involve from your point of view?
I think it's looking at the organization's appetite for marketing. And Lori, one other thing that I'm noticing, not just in my career, but a macroeconomic trend, is that from 2000 to 2020, there's been a 27% reduction in the amount of companies that are publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Diving into that statistic a little deeper, I have to believe or hypothesize that there's been a downstream impact into our functions. And I think that's shaped also how marketing is being de-siloed. And we're seeing that particularly in the 4 primary functions of marketing. We have the 4 Ps, right? Product, price, place, promotion. If I think about it, product, that lives with the product team. Right. The channels, about the placement, well, that typically is in distribution, sometimes handled by commercial teams or products, maybe not necessarily marketing. Of course, there's price, and we're seeing that discipline is becoming its own standalone function as well.
Right.
And lastly, us marketers, what do we have left? We have the promotion piece.
Right.
So your question was about how do you diagnose the situation? How do you diagnose the company and gauge that appetite of the company? And if you're seeing that those things are desegregated or desiloed, there's a need for speed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that there's a huge appetite to go through the painstaking process of customer journey map or the multiple variable regression analysis I spoke about earlier to develop those personas. I think it's educating and having that constant dialogue to continue to shape. It's hard to believe that here we are in 2026, still shaping and educating about what marketing is and could be.
Well, and I think the thing that makes that difficult is the sophistication of the people within the organization making the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the best teams out there are a single team that incorporates the 4 Ps. I call it a commercial team, call it a retail team, whatever it might be. But when you've got all of those team members within the confines of a CRO or a CGO or a CMO managing it down, with a CSO, whatever it might be, I think that is when the best outcomes happen, because we've got more control over, let's just take one tiny little aspect of that happens to be very important, messaging.
Yeah.
So when you are making sure that the message points are that you are educating the entire commercial team on what those points are, that is where the magic really happens, because it isn't siloed anymore. Why is it that you think people are still siloing the teams?
I think that's a really wonderful observation. The reason it's wonderful is because there's this perception and culture-driven approach. There's this fear, I think, as we see the economy shift, and there's maybe not quite as much abundance. We're seeing some layoffs happen. Earlier today, I saw that Disney, as an example, laid off about 1,000 marketers. So it definitely puts a sense of uncertainty into a lot of our minds.
Right.
Because of that, there's this tend to want to grab and hold, this land grab type of approach. And I've always found that fear-based decisions don't end up well.
Right. I would agree. And I think that Disney is very much AI related, by the way. But I also think it becomes kind of a situation where there was a lot of overstaffing pre-AI. And that overstaffing AI has created efficiency. It's not taken the strategy that is needed away at all, but it's created efficiency. And in that situation, I would surmise it has a lot to do with it. But still, from an organizational standpoint, the structure must be set up to really help people succeed.
I agree. And your comments point to other data. I saw recently there's a report, now it's almost 2 years old. It was from Accenture in 2024, November of 2024. And it points to the fact that marketing is not alone in this automation dilemma, if you call it, or efficiency gains. Up to 80%, Accenture claims, of 80% of finances function can be automated now.
Yeah.
So we're not alone in this shift. I think with AI, of course, we're going to see continued trends on that. And then how do we manage in this really fast-paced environment? Silos are either being built up or being taken down in the sake for speed, as we see the consolidation among the New York Stock Exchange. So all these types of macroeconomic things are impacting us today, and then reaching those customers as well and shortening that trust cycle.
Well, I totally agree. The more siloed the approach, the less continuity there is in market between the different in-house teams, if you will, and it creates less trust within the buyer mindset. Talk to me a little bit about that. You gave an incredible lecture yesterday, And you pulled some great stats together. Share that with our audience.
Of course, of course. I love that you touched on the continuity of messaging. One of the cornerstones that I've learned in my career is that consistency is key. We think about when we work out. When do you have your best overall health and fitness? It's when you are working, even if it's maybe for 20 minutes or so a day.
Right.
What tiny baseline you have, that consistency almost builds this anticipation of your physical condition to perform at its best. Marketing, a lot of parallels with that. So the customer journey mapping for me has really allowed me to take that lens and look through and see what's important on a messaging standpoint. What questions are people having? Anticipating those with my own messaging,
Right.
putting myself in customer shoes. And as an example, you mentioned a moment ago, shortening that trust cycle is incredibly important. Why? Because 61% of consumers are willing to pay more for a brand they trust. Now, that's based on a Citibank credit card overall consumer report that was published not too long ago. So, as marketers, building trust through authenticity and I would argue empathy
Absolutely.
becomes that advantage.
It really does. And it comes to life through content, if you think of it, right?
Right.
Just one example of that is content. Without a journey map, without the consistency in messaging, without the understanding of what behavior really helps trigger a positive influence on a brand, all is lost. How does journey mapping truly change the way you approach content creation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when we look at a product perspective, it's easy for marketers, and April Dunford talks about this in her talks as well. She's a wonderful product manager. If you haven't seen her information, I encourage you to go out there. She's got a book also. And she talks about the fact that product managers lean onto that features and benefits. And certainly marketers, we can dress it up and maybe say with them or whatnot. But if you hone in on what the ultimate problem is and what behaviors and other things you're trying to shape, I think that's huge. I'll give you an example. Not too long ago, the pricing team reached out to me because they're working on adopting this new pricing model across the organization. And there's been some resistance. It's classic change management. And what was interesting, as we drilled into the conversation, it wasn't, hey, we want internal adoption. Hey, we want buy-in. The actual behavior that we were trying to jump into was a measure of worth and a belief in that worth.
Right.
So as change managers, because I see that marketing is wearing multiple different hats, that we have to believe in our worth. And what better place to verify that worth than with the voice of the customer? And
Right.
that's through the customer journey mapping process.
And
That's
I
what's
think,
worked for me. Yeah.
well, I love it. And I think that adaptability, if you will, can really become a secret weapon that is so important right now. Why is that?
Adaptability, because of that mass consolidation, the need for speed, siloing, de-siloing that is as a trend. How do you do it without that? I've always struggled with that because I don't know how companies do it. I think they just get in this habit of campaigns and briefs and let's execute on these and let's go to the next either shiny object. And that creates that fragmentation. It reduces that trust. And ultimately, I don't think it's going to land as many customers. That effectiveness goes way down.
Yeah. One of your superpowers, I knew this out of the chute when we were meeting for the first time, is your soft skills and your ability to meet people where they are and truly understand the intent behind what it might be that they need or are asking for. Pricing is a good example.
Yeah.
And then ultimately turning that discussion into something that can be very, very beneficial. Beneficial. That was quite a mix of the two words, wasn't it? How do you connect the dots there with empathy whether it be internal discussions or external communications with business impact?
That's a loaded question because in recent conversations about our company's core values, again, one of our chief officers, I won't say who, referred to this as the squishy stuff, that we're talking about behaviors. I don't see how this is relevant. I don't understand how this is important. But you mentioned adaptability and understanding the environment we're in and what those people value has a huge impact. And I think if I were to think about that empathy as the advantage, I embrace it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do in an engineering-led organization. They value technical data, and I think some of the statistics I brought up earlier help drive that conversation because ultimately we're driving toward the same outcome. But it's interesting as someone who maybe doesn't always fit the mold.
Right.
I have to lean into it. As Sheryl Sandberg said in her book, Lean In, we have to embrace it. Often, we could be given these pink collar jobs, things that may be events or promotional things that perhaps the men in the organization don't want to handle. I'm not saying ours, I'm saying other people's.
Yeah.
But I think not fitting in can give you the edge. And leaning into that conversation. And as the example I brought up about the pricing person, it's about worth.
Yeah.
And how do you drive worth?
Yeah, I agree. Do you think it's more difficult in engineering-led organizations?
I would say absolutely. When we're thinking about a mission that we're trying to accomplish, there tends to be this perception that everyone knows marketing. Anyone can do communications. That's the easy stuff. But like I said, the root of it is behavior driven. And I'm going to quote a TV show here, but the character from Mad Men would say, if you don't like what's being said, change the conversation.
Yep. I tell you, that's a life lesson for anyone listening, let alone anyone out there today. We're almost at the end of our time together. I can't believe it. It's gone by so quickly. I know. I've got one final question for you.
Sure.
A lot of marketers are creating more and more content, but still struggling with trust with buyers who have already entered mid-funnel and are seeing dozens of touch points. What is one shift they need to make to actually break through and influence decisions?
We mentioned it before about consistency. And I think with the messaging, putting things in the words of your customers and their needs, and doing that on a consistent basis with your channels. In the old days of marketing, we said that it was 7 times it took to influence a purchase decision. With the oversaturation of media today and the fragmented environment we find ourselves in, I think we have to amplify that to maybe even triple the amount. So I don't want to oversaturate and overtalk about something that's not relevant. And that can amplify maybe the cracks you have in your existing marketing strategy. So I think seeking cross-functional input is very important. Getting that messaging aligned and having that verification with the voice of the customer to ensure that those message points, that value proposition is in alignment with what the customers are seeking. Now you're golden.
Yeah, I agree. And we've even heard that number 26, 27 times, by the way. And to sum it up, empathy is one way that you can reduce that number down, shorten the sales cycle, increase trust, and increase impact on top line revenue that much more quickly.
Easier said than done, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Do not disagree with you there.
Yeah.
Beth, what is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Oh, great question. So I'm on LinkedIn. Please feel free to connect with me on there. And I'd be happy to talk more with like-minded individuals about marketing and reaching customers in the best way they can.
Well, that's great. And you can link in with me on LinkedIn as well. It's Lori Sartorius Jones there. Beth Wilkerson, it's been such an incredible pleasure today. Thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.